type of standards. Standards can be either volunteer or mandatory. Standards are volunteer and standards are mandatory. कौन से स्टैंडर्ड्स होंगे, और दूसरा इसमें आपने एक चीज ध्यान में ये भी रखनी है कि वो स्टैंडर्ड की जो रिक्वायरमेंट है उनको जब हम चेक करते हैं उसके लिए टर्मिनोलॉजी भी डिफरेंट यूज होगी. Standards are voluntarily when organizations are not legally required to follow them. Organization may choose to follow them to meet customers or industry demand. जब आपके पास एक ऐसा स्टैंडर्ड आ जाए जब गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से वो आपके ऊपर पाबंदी नहीं है, मैंडेटरी नहीं है, तो आप अपनी मर्जी से, कस्टमर की मर्जी से, अपनी ब्रांड की गुड इमेज के लिए या किसी भी तरह से आप जब उसको यूज कर सकते हैं, तो उसके अंदर आपने उसको देखना है कि ये वाली जो चीज है ये किस तरीके से हम इन रिक्वायरमेंट्स को मीट करेंगे. अच्छा, जस्ट 1 मिनट, ये किसी ने स्क्रीन के ऊपर जो ये किया हुआ लाइन, आई एम ट्राइंग टू, ओके, मैंने अगेन शेयर किए, वो जो चीजें लगी हुई थी उसको रिमूव करने के लिए. ओके, तो टाइप ऑफ स्टैंडर्ड्स के एक वो स्टैंडर्ड हैं जो वॉलंटरली स्टैंडर्ड हैं और दूसरे जो हैं वो मैंडेटरी स्टैंडर्ड्स हैं. तो अब हम ये देखेंगे कि जो हमारे वॉलंटियर स्टैंडर्ड हैं उनकी एग्जांपल क्या होगा. जैसे आईएसओ के स्टैंडर्ड्स हैं, ये सारे वॉलंटियर सर्टिफिकेशन स्टैंडर्ड्स हैं, मैंडेटरी नहीं है. आईएसओ 22 फूड सेफ्टी मैनेजमेंट सिस्टम का एक स्टैंडर्ड है, और अगर आपकी कंपनी इससे सर्टिफाइड नहीं भी होगी तो आपकी कंट्री में आप रहते हुए आपके ऊपर कोई केस नहीं हो जाएगा तो आपने क्यों नहीं करवाई. ये जरूरी नहीं है. आपका कस्टमर कह रहा है, कोई और अदारा कह रहा है, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से इम्पोज्ड नहीं आपके ऊपर. अच्छा, अब जब इसकी हम रिक्वायरमेंट चेक करने जाते हैं किसी भी इंडस्ट्री में, तो उसके लिए टर्म बोली जाएगी कंफर्मिटी, टू वेरीफाई द रिक्वायरमेंट्स आर फुलफिल्ड. जब हम ये चेक करेंगे तो इसके लिए हम कंफर्मिटी का वर्ड यूज करेंगे. देन वो स्टैंडर्ड जो मैंडेटरी हैं, जो गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से हैं, गवर्नमेंट कहेगी कि अगर आपने फलां कंट्री के अंदर फलां बिजनेस करना है तो ये स्टैंडर्ड की रिक्वायरमेंट आपने पूरी करनी है, उनको हम कहते हैं मैंडेटरी स्टैंडर्ड्स. और जब एक बंदा उनका ऑडिट करने जाता है, उनकी रिक्वायरमेंट को चेक करने जाता है, उसके लिए वी कैन यूज द वर्ड द टर्मिनोलॉजी और द कांसेप्ट दैट इज कंप्लायंस टू वेरीफाई द रिक्वायरमेंट्स आर फुलफिल्ड. मतलब ये हुआ कि जो मैंडेटरी स्टैंडर्ड हैं जब आप उनका ऑडिट कर रहे हैं तो आप कंप्लायंस का वर्ड बोलेंगे, और जरूरी ये हुआ कि जब आप वॉलंटियर स्टैंडर्ड का ऑडिट कर रहे हैं तो आप उसके लिए कंफर्मिटी का वर्ड यूज करेंगे, कंप्लायंस नहीं यूज करेंगे. ओके, ईयू रेगुलेशन एंड डायरेक्टिव्स. यूरोपियन यूनियन के जो कंट्रीज हैं उनके अंदर कौन सी रेगुलेशंस हैं, कौन सी डायरेक्टिव्स हैं, एंड व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन देम. ओके, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल just see regulations. A regulation is a binding legislative act. It must be applied in its entirety across the EU. जो पूरी EU के 27-28 countries हैं उन सब के ऊपर ये अप्लाई होगा. For example, when the EU wanted to make sure that there are common safeguards on goods imported from outside the EU, the Council adopted a regulation. जैसे MDR, मेडिकल डिवाइसेस रेगुलेशन, इसकी बेस्ट एग्जांपल है. ठीक है, अब यूरोप ये कहता है कि कोई भी मेडिकल डिवाइस पाकिस्तान से, पूरी दुनिया से, जहां से भी यूरोप के अंदर एंटर होगी, इट शुड हैव MDR, मेडिकल डिवाइसेस रेगुलेशन सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ कंफर्मिटी और सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ सी मार्किंग, वो होगा इसके पास, तब हम यूरोप के अंदर उसको ये चीज आने देंगे. अगर ऐसा नहीं हुआ तो प्रोडक्ट एंटर नहीं हो सकती. तो उन्होंने क्या बना दिया, रेगुलेशन. रेगुलेशन क्या है, एक्ट है. उन्होंने अपने पार्लियामेंट के अंदर, वहां एक्ट के अंदर ये चीज शामिल कर दी. ओके, अब देखते हैं डायरेक्टिव क्या है. डायरेक्टिव इज अ लेजिस्लेटिव एक्ट दैट सेट्स आउट गोल दैट ऑल EU कंट्री मस्ट अचीव. वो क्या होगा, पूरे जितनी भी उसके अंदर जितने भी कंट्रीज आ रहे हैं वो हम सब के लिए होगा, और उसके अंदर जो है उसको जो है वो देखा जाएगा कि किस तरीके से हम इसको करेंगे. अच्छा, अच्छा, प्लीज जो लाइंस ऊपर आ रही हैं क्या अगेन आ रही हैं, क्योंकि मैंने स्क्रीन री शेयर की है तो मेरे पास तो ये जो लाइंस हैं वो दोबारा नहीं आ रही, और कुछ लोग ये कमेंट कर रहे हैं कि ऊपर लाइन लगी हुई है.
Still is there, sir. Lines are there.
सर काइंडली ये सब कुछ नजर आ रहा है, आप कंटिन्यू करें. ये जो लोग अंदर मिस कर रहे हैं ना, इनका मतलब यही है कि बस आपको डिस्टर्ब करते रहें। काइंडली आप कंटिन्यू करें अपने।
ओके ओके। एक्चुअली मुझे पता नहीं
जज़ाकल्लाह सर।
जी जी, मुझे एक्चुअली आइडिया नहीं हो रहा कि वो बंदा कौन है, नहीं तो बंदा रिमूव भी कर दे तो ऐसे अगेन डिस्टर्ब हो जाएगा, तो आइडिया नहीं है। खैर, इसको हम फिर कंटिन्यू करते हैं। आई होप कि अब खत्म हो गया होगा।
Yes, sir. It's okay now.
अब ठीक है, आप स्टार्ट करें।
ओके ओके ओके। अच्छा, तो रेगुलेशन की जब हम बात कर रहे हैं, तो रेगुलेशन और डायरेक्टिव हमेशा यूरोप जो है वो रेगुलेशन और डायरेक्टिव पास करता है ज़्यादातर, चूंकि जो कंट्रीज हैं उनका जो ट्रेड का वॉल्यूम है या उनको एक अच्छी अमाउंट ट्रेड से आती है वो यूरोप से आती है, तो इसलिए उन्होंने अपने उन 27 जो 28 कंट्रीज हैं, यूके चूंकि अब अलग हो गया है, तो उन्होंने अपनी जितनी भी चीज़ें हैं उसको सेट किया हुआ है। अब उसके लिए हमें ये देखना पड़ेगा कि किस तरीके से हम उनकी रिक्वायरमेंट्स को मीट करते हैं। रेगुलेशन की मैंने एग्जांपल दी, एमडीआर जितनी भी मेडिकल डिवाइसेस पाकिस्तान से बाहर जा रही हैं वो एमडीआर की रेगुलेशन को मीट करेंगी तो ओके, अदरवाइज नहीं। डायरेक्टिव क्या होता है कि वो पूरे यूरोप के जितने भी कंट्रीज है उनके लिए, फिर उनको कहा जाता है कि इन जो उसमें एक इंडिविजुअल कंट्री है वो उन गोल्स को कैसे पूरा करेगा। वन एग्जाम्पल इज द ईयू कंज्यूमर राइट डायरेक्टिव which strengthens right for consumer across the EU, for example, by eliminating hidden charges and cost on internet and extending the period under which consumers can withdraw from a sales contract. अगर यूरोप के सारे कंट्रीज में आपस में उन्होंने कुछ डायरेक्टिव बनाया होता है, ये भी जो हम कंट्रीज उन कंट्रीज के अंदर हम एक्सपोर्ट कर रहे होते हैं अपनी प्रोडक्ट, तो उनके ऊपर एप्लीकेबल होता है। लेकिन ये इस तरह से कलेक्टिव नहीं है, इसको जो उनकी अपनी डिफरेंट कंट्रीज है वो थोड़ा सा अपने रीजन के अकॉर्डिंगली या अपने उस कंट्री के हिसाब से, मकसद सिर्फ गोल को अचीव करना, थोड़ा सा उसको मॉडिफाई ऑन द रिक्वेस्ट किया जा सकता है।
Talk all about standards and regulation. Well, we've been talking a lot about regulation, and a lot of people that we've interviewed here on Cybers TV keep talking about talk all about standards and regulation. Well, we've been talking a lot about regulation, and a lot of people that we've interviewed here on Cybers TV keep talking about what SWIFT can do and the role that standards can play in helping them navigate this regulatory framework. Well, joining us to discuss this now is Kevin Hoostoun. He is global co-chair of the Global Technical Center Fix Protocol, and also with us is Natasha de Terran, Head of Public Affairs at SWIFT. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk a little bit about what we've been hearing so far at Cybers TV in the last couple of days. I think almost everybody that I've spoken to said there is definitely a role for SWIFT to play in helping us to navigate all the things that we have to do with regards to regulation.
No, that's a monumental task. There's a vast amount of regulation coming out in a multitude of forms across the world, and not all of that regulation is compatible the one with the other. It's also coming out piecemeal in different orders from different jurisdictions, and even within single jurisdictions, it's coming out bit by bit, which makes adherence and implementation and planning, simply the planning factor, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
But any role that SWIFT can play within that, we're more than happy to play.
Yeah. Let's tell you just how you're talking about one of those jurisdictions is the UK. Kevin just handed me this report by the UK government. I mean, you know, I'm going to need my super bad reading skills to get through this in the next couple of minutes or so. But basically, what's it really saying?
So the report was something that the UK Government Office of Science put together over the last 18 months, which looks at the scientific evidence around computer-based trading. We concluded that sort of computer-based trading does contribute, and there are certain problems, and there are tools that can be used to address some of those problems. One of the tools that we felt could be used with standards. So one of the conclusions of the report is that standards should play a larger role. If you look at how other industries are regulated, so you look at, for example, the European framework for ICT regulation, standards are an integral part of that framework. Standards are known at the policy level as one of the tools that they should be using. They're known at the strategic level as one of the tools they then plan to use, and then they're used at the actual tactical level where firms like Swift, enterprises like Swift, enterprises like FPL, I mean that enterprises in the loosest possible world, are the people who are tactically implementing these standards in the field. I think a second thing where Swift can help, not so much as a standard setter, but more as a commercial organisation, is that if you look at a lot of the regulations that are coming down, they are expensive, but they are not differentiating. So a bank's know your client rules are not going to give them a competitive advantage over a second bank's KYC rules. And if you look at where we are in the economic cycle, we're at the beginning of it, we're in the middle of a deleveraging. The corporates are midway through deleveraging. The sovereigns are only really starting, particularly in Europe. And at the same time, capital is becoming, banks are having to hold higher and higher levels of capital to satisfy regulations such as Basel III. It means that, ideally we should be developing the solutions to those as shared tools, possibly from an outsourcing arrangement.
Well, I think, that's I agree with everything that you say on that. I think, this is a UK policy document. The UK...
It's not policy, it's government advice.
Government advice.
Advice to the government.
Right. But I think generally in these advisory documents and in policy documents, we tend to see a lot promoting the use of standards, and the adoption of standards and international compatibility. But when it comes down to the very politicised rulemaking and legislative process, that doesn't always survive. And I think maybe Swift's role is in the aftermath, where we can help to achieve some of the ends that were originally sought.
Okay, we're now also joined by Mark. Again, the magic of television. Mark Bale joins us. He is T2S Program Manager at the ECB. Thanks very much for joining us. What do you make of what you've been hearing so far, and what role standards can play in helping people navigate the regulatory framework?
Well, first, thank you to invite me. Good morning. Yes, standards have a very important role, I think, in the way we can organize and structure the market infrastructure. We take the benefit of doing new infrastructures to input new standards into the market. It allows to, throughout the financial industry, organize and structure the way data will be flowing in between the parties, should it be for regulatory reporting or for the purpose of simply organizing the business and settling the securities transaction in the case of T2S, for instance. And the fact that we use a transversal standard as much as possible, like ISO 20022, which is being now developed and implemented in all segments of the financial industry, we are able, I think, to support the future needs that will come from the regulatory developments which are coming as an outcome of the financial crisis.
Okay. Are there any best practice examples in standards that you would like to draw on or to tell us about?
I think rather than an example, it's a sort of a wish list type thing. I think we all find in developing standards that we don't get enough stakeholders engaged in the initial formation of the standard. So if you look at the stakeholders that we see as FPL, we see representation from a limited number of buy-sides, we see representation from the exchanges, we see representation from the sell-side communities. We see much less participation from the wider buy-side, we see much less participation from other stakeholders, so stakeholders that aren't directly involved in financial services. And one group who are almost absent is actually the regulators. And it would be great to get the regulators along as stakeholders as part of the governance process. And I think that's a best practice which doesn't currently happen, but we could try to build.
Natasha, do you want to come back on that?
Well, I think regulators with free time at the moment are probably pretty scarce animals. That said, I think that generally, I don't know if Mark calls himself a regulator or not, because he comes from that community. I think generally that they accept the benefits of standards. I think enforcing them at a detailed rulemaking level is somewhat more difficult, except in specific sort of enterprises like you've been involved in, Mark, and there it's easier because it's...
Well, yeah, indeed, I am not as a regulator here. I am as an operator of a platform and using standard as a way to implement. But I do believe that regulators including central banks in this case, are more and more aware of the benefit of the usage of standards. As I was saying, this transversal approach to use as much as possible standards which are reusable on the whole line of industry financial services is something which will be very useful in this context. When, let's say, acting as operator, we are particularly careful. I mean, you have seen, for instance, so T2S is one of those. Target 2 just mentioned that they are going to move to ISO 20022 as well. So reusing this, we hear in globally also that it is moving in the US. DTCC is implementing similar standard for also activities which are related to financial information. So this is really going all over the organization. And with the push of the regulator, it takes another dimension. And so certainly, yes.
Okay, well, we've got to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us, all of you.
अब हम बात करेंगे जो डिफरेंट इंटरनेशनल स्टैंडर्ड सेटिंग बॉडीज हैं उनकी, जिसके अंदर IEC है, ISO है, AHAM है, and AMCA and PSI and so many others bodies हैं, जो कि ANAB, अनाब या ANSI, ANSI, अमेरिकन नेशनल स्टैंडर्ड इंस्टीट्यूट, उनकी वेबसाइट पर जाएंगे तो सारी की सारी स्टैंडर्ड सेटिंग बॉडी ANSI, अनाब, जो अमेरिकन नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट फॉर स्टैंडर्ड सेटिंग एंड नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ अमेरिका फॉर स्टैंडर्ड एक्रेडिटेशन, उसकी वेबसाइट पर भी जाएंगे तो आपको सारी की सारी ये वाली जो बॉडीज हैं ये वहाँ मिल जाएंगे। अब हमें ये डिसाइड करना है, हमें ये देखना है कि किस बॉडी का कितना मेजर कंट्रीब्यूशन है। स्टैंडर्ड तो डिफरेंट बॉडीज पब्लिश कर रही हैं, ये जो आप स्क्रीन पे देख रहे हैं सारे सर्टिफिकेशन सारे के सारे कंफर्मिटी असेसमेंट के या डिफरेंट प्रोडक्ट प्रोसेस मैनेजमेंट के स्टैंडर्ड पब्लिश कर रहे हैं। जो पहला लोगो आपको नजर आ रहा है IEC, ये स्टैंडर्ड पब्लिश करते हैं इंटरनेशनल इलेक्ट्रोटेक्निकल कमीशन, यानी इलेक्ट्रिकल इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स के स्टैंडर्ड जस्ट पब्लिश करते हैं। उसके बाद ISO है, ISO जो है वो बेसिकली स्टैंडर्ड पब्लिश करेगा जितने भी इसका स्कोप सबसे बड़ा है, यानी ये पब्लिश प्रोडक्ट के भी कर रहा है, प्रोसेस के भी स्टैंडर्ड पब्लिश कर रहा है, इलेक्ट्रिकल इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स के IEC के साथ मिलकर पब्लिश कर रहा है, केमिकल, फूड, लेदर, टेक्सटाइल, व्हाटएवर द फील्ड, व्हाटएवर द सेक्टर, व्हाटएवर द एरिया ऑफ इंटरेस्ट, ISO के स्टैंडर्ड आपको मिलेंगे। और ऑलमोस्ट 24,000 के करीब स्टैंडर्ड्स इन्होंने पब्लिश किए हैं। बहुत सारे स्टैंडर्ड्स जो हैं वो पाइपलाइन में हैं, इन प्रोसेस हैं, और पूरी दुनिया के डिफरेंट जो कंट्रीज़ हैं वो इसके मेंबर हैं, और हर कंट्री से एक नेशनल मेंबर बॉडी ISO के साथ मेंबर है, और वो मिलकर डिफरेंट काइंड के स्टैंडर्ड्स जो हैं वो पब्लिश कर रहे हैं।
Hello friends, in our day-to-day life, we keep on listening about ISO standards. The most common that we found is ISO 9001:2015. The questions that came into our mind are: what is ISO standard? Why it's important to companies? How it impacts our perspective of looking at the products manufactured by ISO certified companies? How one should get ISO certificate? In this video, we are going to learn the basics of ISO standards. To get an answer to all of these questions, watch this video till the end. So, let's begin. Let's start with what is ISO. ISO is an international standard setting body. Founded on February 23, 1947, the organization promotes worldwide proprietary, industrial, and commercial standards. It is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, and works in 164 countries worldwide. It is an independent, non-governmental organization. ISO has 3 membership categories. The first one is member bodies. There are currently 121 standard bodies from each country as a full member. They participate and vote in ISO technical and policy meetings. They can sell and adopt ISO international standards nationally. The second category is correspondent members. There are 39 correspondent members. They do not have their own standards organization. These members can only observe ISO technical and policy meetings. Correspondent members can also sell and adopt ISO international standards nationally. The third category is subscriber members. ISO has 4 subscriber members. These are countries with small economies. These members keep up to date on ISO's work but cannot participate in it. They do not sell or adopt ISO international standards nationally. More than 20,000 standards have been set by ISO, covering everything from manufactured products and technology to food safety, agriculture, and healthcare. Some of the popular standards developed by ISO are ISO 9001 for quality management. ISO 9001 is the world's best-known quality management standard. This standard ensures that goods and services consistently meet the customer's requirements. ISO 45001 for occupational health and safety management. This standard focuses on reducing workplace hazards and make sure that everyone gets home safely. ISO 14001 for environmental management. This standard focuses on improving your environmental performance. It provides assurance to management, employees, and stakeholders that the environmental impact of the company is being measured and improved. ISO 22000 for food safety management. It ensures that the food that we eat is safe. It focuses on the highest level of food safety throughout the entire life cycle of food. ISO 27001 for information security management. This standard focuses on providing security for any kind of digital information. It helps an organization manage the security of assets such as financial information, intellectual property, employee data, and information, etc. It is a systematic approach to managing information that is considered sensitive and of significant value to a business. Now that we understand what ISO is, let's understand why it's needed. ISO was founded with the idea of answering a fundamental question: what is the best way of doing this? International standards mean that consumers can have confidence that their products are safe, reliable, and of good quality. The standards help businesses increase productivity while minimizing errors and waste. The standards also serve to safeguard consumers and the end users of products and services, ensuring that the certified products conform to the minimum standards set internationally. ISO international standards touch everyone. From enabling you to use your bank card overseas to ensuring your child's toys don't have sharp edges, they are used everywhere. Followed by companies all over the world, ISO standards provide specifications to ensure products and services work the way you expect them to. For companies in some industries, ISO certification may be required by law or contractually. Below are some of the many benefits of conforming to ISO standards. Saving time and money by identifying and solving recurring problems. Improving system and process efficiency. Increasing customer satisfaction. Being more competitive when tendering for contracts. Getting more value out of all resources. Boosting your credibility in the eyes of your customers. Improving environment health. Improving employee health and satisfaction, etc. The important term under ISO, IAF, with a tagline of certified once, accepted everywhere, International Accreditation Forum, IAF, provides accreditation to organizations in various countries. IAF ensures that the organizations are competent to do the work they undertake and are not subject to conflicts of interest. IAF established mutual recognition arrangements, known as multilateral recognition arrangements or MLA, between its accreditation body. MLA covers all accreditation bodies in all countries in the world. This eliminates the need for companies to be certified in each country where they work. Accreditation bodies are recognized by IAF and signatory of MLA. They ensure that certification bodies, CB, are following ISO standards and accredit CBs. There are around 120 accreditation bodies worldwide. Certification body, CB. Certification bodies are accredited by the accreditation body to perform audits and issue certificates of conformance to qualifying companies. Let's understand the difference between accreditation and certification. Accreditation, license provided to certification bodies to perform the certification audits and issue the certificates, is called accreditation. So, the certification body gets accreditation. There is usually only one accreditation body for each country. Certification, it is a certificate issued to a company by certification body stating that a company is compliant with the standard. Now let's look at the steps to get ISO certification. The important thing to note here is, ISO develops international standards, such as ISO 9001 and ISO 14001, but they are not involved in providing certification, and do not issue certificates. You can read this information by visiting the ISO's official website. The certification process is performed by external certification bodies, also known as CB. Thus, a company or organization cannot be certified by ISO itself. Now let's take a look at the hierarchy that is being followed in order to get certified. ISO is an organization that develops standards. Then IAF provides accreditation to standard bodies as an accreditation body. Certification bodies are accredited by the accreditation body. They perform audits and issue certificates of conformance to qualifying companies. Steps in getting ISO certificate. The first step is choosing the type of ISO certification. You will need to choose the type of ISO certification required for your business. If you are into the manufacturing sector, you can go for popular certification like ISO 9001 for quality management, ISO 14001 for environmental management, or ISO 45001 for health and safety management. Food businesses can go for ISO 22000 for food safety management, and so on. The second step is choosing an ISO certification body. It is very important that you choose a certification body which is recognized and credible. When choosing a certification body, you should identify the national standard body in your country recognized by IF. For example, in India, it is a National Accreditation Board for Certification Bodies, or NABCB. Evaluate several certification bodies accredited by that AB. For example, in India, TUV, Bureau Veritas, BSI, URS, DNV.GL, and SGS are some of the well-known certification bodies accredited by NABCB. Accreditation is not compulsory, but it does provide independent confirmation of competence. To find an accredited certification body, contact the national accreditation body in your country or visit the International Accreditation Forum. Choose CBs that are reputed and experienced to provide a certificate in your type of industry. You will find a link in the description below to a website where you can find ABs and CBs in your country simply by typing a few keywords in the search box. The third step is to create an application. The applicant or company and the CB should agree on a contract. This contract usually defines the rights and obligations of both parties, and it includes liability issues, confidentiality, and access rights. The fourth step is the documents review. The ISO auditor will review all your manuals and documents related to various policies and procedures. A review of existing work will help the ISO auditor to identify the possible gaps against the requirements specified in the ISO standards. The fifth step is to make an action plan. After the ISO auditor communicates the existing gaps in your organization, you should prepare an action plan to eliminate these gaps. You may be required to give training to your employees to work efficiently while adapting to new procedures. Make all the employees aware of the ISO standards in terms of work efficiency and quality standards. The sixth step is an initial certification audit. The initial certification audit is divided into two categories: Stage 1 and Stage 2. In Stage 1, the ISO auditor will audit the changes made by you in the company. They will then try to identify the possible nonconformities in your systems and procedures. They will then categorize it as minor or major nonconformities. The company must carefully assess all these nonconformities and correct it as per the desired standards through modification. In Stage 2, after all the required changes are done in the organization, the ISO auditor does the final auditing. The auditor will check whether all the nonconformities have been eliminated or not as per ISO standards. If the ISO auditor is satisfied, they will prepare the final ISO audit report and forward it to the certification body. The seventh step is completing the ISO certification. Once the nonconformities are addressed and all the findings are put in the ISO audit report, the CB will grant you the ISO certification. The format of the certificate will be like this and is valid for 3 years. Surveillance audits. Surveillance audit is basically conducted to ensure that ISO quality standards are being maintained by the organization. Usually, it is conducted once a year. Let's look at the cost involved in the ISO certification process. The cost for getting ISO certification is not fixed, and varies from organization to organization. The certification body calculates the cost of ISO certification separately for each organization. It is based on number of employees, number of processes, level of risk associated with the scope of services of the organization, complexity of the management system, and the number of working days and shifts, etc. The common misunderstanding about ISO certification is, it requires a lot of documentation. The truth is, ISO does require documentation. But, it does not emphasize creating new documents or procedures which are not required in the process. You should have a documented procedure of what you are always doing, and you must do what you have documented. All processes must follow the Plan Do Check Act cycle, also known as PDC, a cycle invented by Deming. To simplify the process of getting ISO certificate, Learn and Apply plays an important role. Our expert consultant in the field of ISO certification has developed a dedicated roadmap. It makes the process of getting certified extremely easy and seamless. To know more about ISO certification service, please get back to us by visiting www.learnandapply.org. We will be happy to make your ISO certification dream true. Now to end. Share this video in your entire group to improve. Hello friends, in our day-to-day life, we keep on listening about ISO.
Hello and welcome to today's special broadcast. With the help of my trusty assistant, ISO Hungry, I will investigate the great mystery of the 5 stages of standards development.
Hey Andy.
Hi ISO, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. You?
Oh, pretty good. What's up?
I'm trying to find out how ISO makes standards. How does it work?
Well, it all starts with when someone has a great idea for an international standard. So it can be on anything. Something to make food safer to eat, a new technology for green transportation, or even a step-by-step guide for making sock puppets so that no important things are forgotten.
Ah, so anyone can send an idea to ISO for something they want to standardize?
Well, not exactly. Our rules say that it must come from an ISO member body, or an ISO technical committee, or one of the many organizations that participate in ISO's work.
Ah.
Yeah. So what happens then is ISO will check to see if there's a global market need for this standard proposal. It's done by asking countries to vote. And so if it's approved, the proposal gets added to an ISO committee's work program.
I see.
Yeah.
So if a sock puppet making proposal is approved by an existing committee, what happens next? Can I help write it? I type well.
Well, that's great, ISO. But as you know, we have ISO members. These are the national standards bodies. There can only be one member per country, and they can choose to actively participate in a committee. And we call them P members, okay? They're participants. Now, these P members can nominate experts to write the standard. And other organizations who work with us, the liaisons, they can also nominate experts. So all of them then get together to write the draft standard. And this takes place in the working group.
Ah, so experts work together and then what?
Well, first the experts have to agree on the document once it's finished, and then the document is sent up to what we call the Parent Technical Committee, or the TC, for review. So unlike the working group, which is made up of the experts who write the standard, the TCs are made up of national representatives.
I see. I brought a CD. I want to dance.
Not this kind of CD. We're talking about the CD stage of a standard. This is the committee draft. So in this stage, the committee or subcommittee shares the draft standard they receive from the working group, like we talked about before, with other experts in their countries for comment. So once the member bodies receive feedback from these national experts, or stakeholders as we call them, they will then vote to approve or disapprove the draft.
So this is the first stage where comments from national standards bodies are considered?
That's right.
Wow. This is serious stuff. Like me. Serious puppet.
Wait, ISO. Don't forget the committee draft is now optional.
Why?
Well, if the working group concludes that the draft standard is of good quality and thinks it's ready to move forward, then they can ask the parent committee or subcommittee to skip this stage altogether and go directly to the next stage, which is the DIS.
Who's dissing who, Andy?
Nobody's dissing anybody, ISO. The DIS stands for the Draft International Standard. What happens when a standard reaches this stage? The committee will send it to ISO Central Secretariat, and then we take that draft and send it to all ISO member bodies for voting.
Oh, so up till now, only P members could vote? Now all ISO members can vote? Can I vote?
Well, not you, but all members can vote, but it's an obligation for the P members to vote.
So how does the DIS get approved?
Okay, so here's what you need. First, you need 2/3 of the P members in the committee that developed the document to approve it. and you don't want any more than 1/4 of all the votes cast to be negative. So if you've met both of these conditions, you have the consensus that you need to move on to the next stage.
Cool. Do I get that pizza now?
Hey, ISO.
Hi, Andy. So what happens next?
Okay, so if the DIS ballot is closed and the vote passed with only very minor changes, then we can publish it as an international standard.
But what if there were lots of comments on the DIS vote?
In that case, the committee will go through an extra stage, which is called the Final Draft International Standard stage. Here, all the comments are considered, then all members vote on the updated draft.
But members can still submit comments?
No, at this stage, they have to approve the document as it is. So if they vote against it, they have to give a technical reason why.
I see.
Yeah, so just like the DIS, the FDIS is approved if 2/3 of the P members in the committee approve it, and no more than 1/4 of the total votes are negative. So with the Final Draft International Standard approved, we can finally move on to the last stage. Publication!
लीगल रजिस्टर ये होता है कि एक आप जिस भी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के अंदर आप काम कर रहे हैं, उस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में आपसे रेलेवेंट काफ़ी सारी गवर्नमेंट की रिक्वायरमेंट्स होती हैं, आपने उसको एक रजिस्टर के अंदर टैग करना है और देन अपनी इंडस्ट्री के हवाले से उनकी रिक्वायरमेंट्स को मीट करना है। लीगल रजिस्टर इज अ फॉर्म ऑफ डॉक्यूमेंट्स और सिस्टम दैट डिटेल्स लेजिस्लेशन दैट एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन हैज टू बी कंप्लायंट विद ड्यू टू एक्टिविटीज इट कैरीज आउट। द लीगल रजिस्टर माइट ओनली contain certain legislation of a certain type, for example, environment, health and safety legislation, on the regulatory requirements for the drug inspection units, for the boiler inspection unit, and some others. अब फॉर एग्जांपल आपकी फूड की कंपनी है, अभी मैं यही पहले भी बता रहा था कि अगर आपका फूड की कंपनी, तो आप देखोगे यार अगर हम पंजाब में हैं, फूड में हैं, लाहौर सुंदर इंडस्ट्रियल स्टेट में है, क्या क्या लीगल रजिस्टर्ड में रिक्वायरमेंट आएंगी जो लीगल रिक्वायरमेंट और हमारे ऊपर एप्लीकेबल हो रही है। तो उसके अंदर क्या आएगा, पीएसक्यूसी के कुछ प्रोडक्ट आपके पीएसक्यूसी के अंदर भी आ सकते हैं, पंजाब फूड अथॉरिटी भी लीगल रजिस्टर्ड में आएगा। और बॉयलर अगर लगा हुआ है, कुछ जूस या मिल्क या इस तरह कर रहे हैं, तो बॉयलर लगा हुआ है तो बॉयलर इंस्पेक्शन यूनिट भी होगा इधर कोट लखपत लाहौर के अंदर, वो भी आपके ऊपर एप्लीकेबल है। पीआरए पंजाब रेवेन्यू अथॉरिटी, वो भी आपके ऊपर आएगा। अगर आपका कोई लैंड का कोई इशू है तो एलडीए, उसके अंडर भी आप आ जाएंगे। उसके अलावा और डिफरेंट जो रिक्वायरमेंट्स के गवर्नमेंट के ऑर्गेनाइजेशन हैं, वो एससीसीपी है या कुछ और है, तो वो सारे के सारे आप लिखेंगे। अगर आप फार्मास्यूटिकल में हैं तो आप लिखेंगे ड्रग रेगुलेटरी अथॉरिटी ऑफ पाकिस्तान। तो जिस भी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, सबसे पहले आपने वर्कआउट करना है इस बात के ऊपर कि हमारे ऊपर कौन कौन सी लीगल रिक्वायरमेंट्स लग रही हैं। एक बंदे की ड्यूटी होनी चाहिए कि आपके लीगल रजिस्टर्ड में वो सारी चीजें टाइप करे और उसको विद द पैसेज ऑफ टाइम अपडेट करता रहे, उन अदारों की वेबसाइट पर जाके देखता रहे कि कौन सी न्यूज़ हमारे रेलिवेंट हैं। न्यूज़पेपर आप पढ़ सकते हो, उन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के जो आपसे रेलिवेंट है उनके सेमिनार वेबिनार अटेंड कर सकते हो ताकि आपका नॉलेज अपडेटेड रहे। तो लीगल रजिस्टर्ड के अंदर ये सारी चीज़ें आपने मेंशन करनी है। और जिस सूबे के अंदर हैं, जिस प्रोविंस में हैं, जिस कंट्री में हैं, अगर फॉर एग्जांपल आप सुंदर इंडस्ट्रियल स्टेट के अंदर हैं या लांडी इंडस्ट्रियल स्टेट कराची में हैं, तो आपको ये देखना है कि उस इंडस्ट्रियल स्टेट के अपने भी कुछ रिक्वायरमेंट्स हैं, आपने उनको भी लिखना है, क्योंकि ये गवर्नमेंट की ही कंपनी के अंडर आते हैं, बनाए हुए अदारों के अंडर आते हैं जितने भी इंडस्ट्रियल स्टेट पाकिस्तान के अंदर हैं। तो इस तरह से आप अपने लीगल रजिस्टर्ड को अपडेट करेंगे, मेंटेन करेंगे और उसके ऊपर एक बंदा डिप्यूट करेंगे जो कि अपडेटेड नॉलेज उसके अंदर टैप करता रहेगा। एंड थैंक यू।